How do atheists ground their views of morality? What method do we use to determine good and bad and right and wrong actions? These are some of the questions that are posed by religious apologists all the time. And typically, religious apologists will come at you with like the moral arguments. This argument claims that God is the grounding of all of our moral intuitions and all of our moral decisions and what we basically consider to be right, wrong, good, bad, and morally gray. Some religious apologists out there will try to convince you that they're not saying that you can't be a good person or you can't know right and wrong without some kind of belief in God, but they will refactor it and repackage it into this idea that atheists steal from a religious worldview in order to justify things as being right or wrong. In this video today, Frank Turek is going to make an argument that under an quote-unquote atheist worldview, there would be things that would eventually become good or okay, or at least seen as good or okay by the majority of the population. Of course, we can identify this as just being purely speculative and playing a what-if slippery slope kind of game, but Frank Turek is regularly repeated by a good number of people out there, a good number of Christians. So today, if you want to fuck around and find out why Frank Turek is wrong about not only atheism, but our moral foundations, then please stay tuned. What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Like I said, today we're taking a look at Frank Turek, who is going to be laying out the slippery slope argument that atheism can lead to some pretty horrible actions being justified as being good or okay. Obviously, I have a number of problems with Frank's argument here right from the outset, primarily because this particular justification of obviously horrible acts can occur on both sides of this discussion. There have been plenty of religious leaders and religious rulers in the past that have used religion in order to commit some of the most heinous acts in history. Just like there have been some people that haven't been all that religious that have also used a more secular notion of good, bad, and right and wrong that's not based in religion in order to commit heinous acts against their fellow man. So it seems like religiosity in this particular respect doesn't really have that much of an effect, other than I would say that under religiosity, you can more easily convince people that bad things that are objectively abhorrent, as we can all agree that they are actually good things. And we've seen this a number of times in our history. You could just go back to some of the monarchs of England who waged wars based on religious ideals. During Elizabeth I's reign, she waged war with Catholic Spain in a Protestant Catholic war. That was primarily religiously driven because of differing ideas within Christianity itself. Oliver Cromwell, Lord Protector as he's known, he wasn't a monarch, but he did lead several military campaigns into Ireland and Scotland that were primarily driven by his religious convictions. If we go all the way back to Henry V in the 100 Years' War, while that wasn't primarily a religiously driven conflict, it was often framed in a very religious context of divine will and divine righteousness. So religion has had its own hand in causing a lot of societal problems where people use the religion in order to take advantage of other people in the society and also wage wars and commit very horrible actions. In the modern times, we see the Catholic Church hide behind the reverence that people give them so that they can circulate and protect pedophiles that exist within the clergy. Of course, Catholics aren't the only ones doing this. Protestants are also doing this in their own respective communities. So it seems to me like this moral intuition that's granted by God is not based on religiosity, but rather it's based on a very subjective idea of what morality is and what we classify as morally good, bad, right, or wrong. All right, so let's get to Frank's video.
Why do you have to have God to have morality? Because Sam Harris, of course, one of the four horsemen of the neo-atheist apocalypse, likes to say that through genetic evolution, we have come to a point where morality, whilst it may not mean anything on this spiritual level, it is good for the herd. It is good for human survival. It is ingrained in people now genetically and through evolution to not kill each other because we genetically want to perpetuate the species. So I want you to speak on that a little bit more, because I know that there's people in here who have that in the back of their mind, and I just wanted to have you expand on that.
Well, first of all, evolution doesn't explain morality in the same way that Christianity wants to explain morality. Like, we don't base our moral decisions on what would be best for evolution or necessarily what would be best for the survival of ourselves personally or our species. But where evolution and morality sort of intersect is in the concept of a social species and how social species evolve. And that's what we are. That's what apes in general are. We are part of a social species, and therefore, because we're part of a social species, we require to get along in larger and larger groups in order to survive. And we've been able to survive and thrive because morality and empathy and everything that goes into that mix of things helps us to survive cohesively as a group. So that's how morality factors into evolution. There are also some other aspects to this that we could focus on, but the overarching idea is that morality isn't explained by evolution, but morality is a factor in the survival of our species that explains how our societies have developed into the massive societies that we have now. And it also explains how our social norms developed over time. Of course, this doesn't explain how morality changes over time, because obviously morality does, or at least our sense of morality or this shared moral foundation that people in society seem to exhibit. That would be due to cultural evolution. How a society culturally changes inherently changes the social norms as well as the shared moral foundation that we all experience. But all right, let's see what Frank Turek has for us.
Let me see if I can evolution account for morality?
There you go.
Okay.
Well, okay, so before Frank gets deeper into his topic here, can evolution account for morality? Evolution can explain why morality is a major factor in the survival of the human species. Cultural evolution can explain why certain societies at certain points in time, have the social norms and the moral foundations that they do. So it's not as simple as can evolution explain morality or account for morality? It's more about how morality factors into the evolution of our species, how that helped us to survive, and none of that has anything to do with dictating what is good, bad, right, or wrong.
First of all, we need to point out that moral laws are not chemical or biological. They are immaterial and they come from personal agents. So there's no mutating genetic code that has any authority to tell you or me or anyone else how to behave, right?
I would agree with this sentiment that moral laws are not based on chemical or necessarily biological stuff. But, I mean, that's not what anybody says about evolution and morality. As I explained prior to this point, it has nothing to do with the chemical nature of DNA or anything like that. It's a very complex issue that has to deal with how societies form and evolve over time. And morality is just one particular factor in how our species was able to survive and thrive. So this first point here on Frank Turek's list just is a non sequitur. Nobody's talking about this particular point. Nobody is making this argument. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of Frank Turek and other apologists out there. And this is because they have to drive a narrative. This narrative that evolution is somehow supposed to be prescribing moral laws or is supposed to dictate debate what is and isn't moral, when in reality, if they were actually attacking the real argument that is being made on this evolution of morality idea, they really wouldn't have too much to say about it. Well, I mean, maybe Frank, he's a creationist, so, I mean, anything that deals with explaining our reality without God, he's instantly gonna come up with some kind of apologetic that circumnavigates around your intellect in order to try to convince you that you definitely need God for this basic ass shit. Basic ass shit. There's no corn in his shit nuggets.
Secondly, chemistry and biology are descriptive. They're not prescriptive. Evolution describes what does survive. It doesn't tell us what ought to survive. So why humans? Why not dolphins or roaches or kangaroos?
Hold on, I just need to check with my barometer real quick. Honey?
Yeah?
Kangaroos, cockroaches, and all these other animals that this fuck just listed still exist, right? Okay, thank you. What the fuck does this have to do with anything? This is yet again another non sequitur. Like, all of those animals still exist today. Also, nobody is arguing that evolution prescribes like these oughts, these moral oughts, like somebody ought to do this thing. Evolution is a description of how groups of organisms and organisms in general change over time due to environmental factors as well as other factors like sexual selection, natural selection, and all that. This is yet again another straw man, which ends up just being a non sequitur point. That's right, honey. He's a stupid bitch.
You know, what Sam Harris is doing is he's smuggling a moral law into his system to get it to work.
Well, I'm not exactly sure exactly what the guy is talking about as far as Sam Harris goes. I do think that Sam Harris is trying to explain why morality exists and why morality is such a good thing to societies today without some kind of religious basis to it. That's what I think that he's trying to do. He's not trying to smuggle anything, and he's definitely not trying to say that evolution prescribes any kind of oughts or anything like that. He's just trying to explain how morality is factored into our continued survival.
Right? He's trying to assume that human beings are valuable and we ought to treat one another to promote human flourishing. Well, I generally agree with Sam Harris. That's what we ought to do.
Well, if my memory serves from reading The Moral Landscape, what Sam Harris is doing is he presents as a fundamental axiom the fact that we are thinking agents in our society. The end goal of having our species survive, in order to attain that end goal of doing that in your lifetime, then morality is inherently necessary, or at least this moral, having a good moral sense about you, or a moral sense that is cohesive with the society that you exist within. He's not saying that, oh, you know, we ought to do these things. He's saying, well, if we want to attain this goal, then you know, these are the things that should happen. So he's subjectively defining his foundation here, but I would say that Christians also subjectively define their foundation as God, because we don't have good evidence that God exists, and we have really good evidence that Frank Turek's God definitely doesn't exist.
But only a theist can justify that. He can't. Also, should we rape to survive? If survival is our end, as some evolutionists will say, then if we can propagate our genes by raping, why shouldn't we do that?
Yeah, you're right, honey. What the fuck? Obviously, you can make moral judgments, however subjective you want to consider them, about the act of raping somebody. It's very detrimental to the person that's being raped, and it violates their bodily autonomy, and it violates their agency. So there are a lot of secular reasons as to why grape is wrong. But I would also like to point out how there are a lot of instances in the Old Testament where God seemingly approves of grape in one way or another. The entire system where the man pays for a woman is raping the woman, like in the sexual aspect of being in a marriage or marrying somebody. If you're paying for that person and not getting their consent, then that is graping them. It's a form of sexual slavery. God obviously doesn't have a problem with grape. He doesn't have a problem prescribing grape in certain instances. in order for his people to propagate and multiply, as he said in the Bible. There are other instances in the Bible, in the Old Testament laws, where God actually describes situations where a woman could get raped and also be forced to marry her rapist. Don't give me this high horse fucking argument about grape, Frank Turek, because if you look into your book that you hold in such high regard, you're not going to find God saying, hey, don't grape people. In fact, you've got God saying, hey, you know what? Purchase women with money and other goods and services, and then you can have sex with them, and you can have as many children as you can, and there you go. The entire chosen people, group of chosen people that are built off of grape, a society that promotes grape. Way to go, Frank.
We could also ask the question: should we murder the weak to help others to survive? That's Hitler's agenda there. Well,
it's also God's agenda. God obviously wants the Israelites to go in and wipe out all these other groups. You've got multiple different verses in the Old Testament that you could cite for this, like 1 Samuel 15, 1 through 3, Deuteronomy 20 somewhere in there. Numbers 31 literally has God telling Moses to go and kill a whole bunch of people just because they don't worship him. And I know Frank's response to this would be, oh, but they were sacrificing small babies to Baal. Whether or not that's true, the solution to the problem is not to go in and kill those babies for Yahweh. Because it wasn't that, they were supposed to go in there and rescue all the children. No, that's not what it was. It was, hey, go in there and utterly destroy them. Kill all of them, is what God said, including the infants, including the small children, including the innocent women. So this particular idea right here is endorsed by the book that he claims is morally superior.
Hitler, in his mind, was trying to do a good thing. The tyrants are always trying to do good things, right? I mean, Thanos wants to knock out, half of the population, right? To do a good thing. You know that.
I don't know if he realizes this, but God literally wiped out the entire human race with the exception of one family that family fucked their way into repopulating the earth. So, I mean, he's calling Thanos some kind of tyrant that's immoral and comparable to Hitler. But you don't count God among those people when God, in his worldview, in Frank's worldview, God has literally done that for a good reason. Oh, I'm so sorry there, Frank. Hold on. I'm so sorry. You're going to specially plead your way into, oh, well, it's God. He can do what he wants. That, again, makes no fucking sense. Sure, I could specially plead for anybody. I also have the cojones to sit here and say, that's fucking shit. That is a horrible action to do. And I would condemn anybody that would command that particular moral action. Frank, on the other hand, seems to like to, explain away why it's okay for God to eradicate all of humanity.
And by the way, we're having a book come out next year called Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God. Look for it. Anyway,
perfect.
Should we murder the weak to help others? If evolution is true, why not? And since evolution is a process of change, then morals must change. Rape may one day be considered good, according to evolution, and then...
Well, I mean, your book already makes that argument, and so I don't know why. That would be considered regressive. That's not progressing in society. That's a big point here, is that if we were to go back to raping women being okay, biblical times and shit, then that would be a regressive action, not a progressive action. And generally, in societies, we tend to progress, the march of progress, progress forward in society so that, we can provide a better and better society that allows all people to survive. Now, raping somebody, being that it's a very detrimental to not only the person, but the society that the person exists within, the people exist within, that seems like it would not be part of the march of progress of society. That would be a regressive action to go back that way, which brings me to my next point of the fact that the GOP, which Frank is a part of, this conservative asshole movement, they want to regress society back to a point where raping a woman would be fine. So don't give me this high horse bullshit there, Frank.
Finally, they say, well, we just got to do it to cooperate. Well, why cooperate when not cooperating often helps you survive? Like, for example, Stalin didn't have to cooperate. He had a bunch of henchmen. He killed millions of his own people and then took their stuff and lived comfortably until he died on his deathbed at the age of 74, shaking his fist at God one last time.
I mean, I don't see how this factors into the whole cooperate thing. Like, obviously, Stalin is an outlier here in this particular conversation, because in this context, we're talking about like a pluralistic society, not a society that's run by a dictator, where the dictator is the end all be all of, you know, morality, I guess, or at least what's legal and not legal. I would think that a more free, democratic, and just pluralistic society, you would end up having people that would need to cooperate with each other so that this level of diversity can survive and thrive. So we're talking about two different things here. He's convoluting the conversation, and he's making an equivocating just a general society and how a society should work to this one very specific particular society. And yes, does that mean that I can subjectively define my moral foundation to be able to chastise Stalin and what he did and the horrible actions that he committed against his own people? Yes. But I would say that makes me no different than the Christian out there that subjectively defines their moral foundation on their God based on whatever rules they seem to actually agree with that are laid down by the Bible, or at least some rules that are laid down by some fuck they choose to listen to. And if they don't like what that fuck ends up telling them, they can easily just leave and go to another fuck that will tell them the exact thing that they want to hear. So however you go about it, it's still all ultimately subjective. It's just which asshole are you choosing to tell you what is moral and immoral? I gotta tell you, I'm not choosing Frank fucking Turek.
So there's so many problems with this. There is no ontological, big word meaning being. There's no ontological ground for morality outside of God himself.
Well, I mean, considering that humans are the ones that create these moral laws, and humans are the ones that abide by these moral laws. Humans are the ones that are making these moral decisions. It seems like humans being the ones to dictate what is moral and immoral is perfectly illogical. Introducing a magical wizard man that exists outside of time, space, and reality that for some reason cares about whether or not you jerk off at night, that is the illogical thing in this discussion. Inserting the magical wizard man is never going to be a better explanation than natural explanations.
Everything else would just be Sam Harris's opinion against Hitler's opinion.
Well, yes, but you would also have a lot of people agreeing with Sam Harris's conclusions versus Hitler's conclusions. Now, Hitler existed in a society much, in similar but different ways to Stalin, in that, Hitler was the end all be all. He was the one that set these moral foundations. Like, he was the one to prescribe these moral things. In worldwide economy of societies, it's exactly how in the worldwide economy of societies, each society determining their own set of moral values is just how shit is always operated everywhere. Literally, Frank Turek is asking you to forego what you know about human development over the centuries for his magical wizard dude that exists outside of time and space.
So you need God for morality. You also need God to set purpose, because without purpose, as we talked about earlier, there's no way to determine whether acting a certain way is good because it's taking you toward that purpose, or bad, taking you away from that purpose.
I mean, I don't need God to give me a purpose in my life. And the only purpose on a Christian worldview is just to serve God and do whatever God wants, which leaves you open to just some random fuck telling you that this is what God wants and using your particular holy book in order to justify that, oh yeah, sure, God definitely wants you to purchase that little girl over there with like 3 calves and 5 loaves of bread. You're opening yourself up to a whole host of problems when you start basing your moral decisions on what some wizard that exists outside of everything, time, space, reality, like I've said before, what he wants.
Morality requires purpose, just like football requires purpose. Otherwise, you wouldn't know what a good play was and what a bad play was.
And of course I agree with you. You know that.
Well, you know, what's a good play and what's a bad play? That's a subjective determination, Frank. What the fuck are you talking about? In football, like the good plays, bad plays are subjective. There are plays in which we can objectively make the case that, yeah, that was a bad play. Even if we particularly like that play, we can make a coherent argument as to why that was a bad play. That's all subjective. It's determined by humans. The rules are determined by humans. The rules change over time. You think that football exists now in the exact same way it did back when it was first formed? No, it has to change with society, just like with morality. Morality also has to change with society.
I wanted you to be able to expand on that and just
sure.
And I think it makes sense that just like a lion who kills a gazelle, he did nothing morally wrong. If we are made up of the same stardust, the same mutated evolutionary atoms, but have no moral grounding, there would be no difference between a lion killing a gazelle and another person killing another person. That morally, it's the same.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. Thanks, Carl.
I feel like we're talking about this from a perspective of like nature. Of course, nature is amoral, so nature doesn't care. If a lion kills a gazelle, it's the same thing as one fuck killing another fuck in a society. But from a very human perspective, you know, these animals exist out in the wild, and part of that circle of life is that lions hunt gazelles and that's their food. Like, that's just part of the ecosystem. Whereas in our ecosystem, in our environment, we have a society, and part of that society is that we have to coexist together. A society will not survive if it just allows people to go around killing people all willy-nilly and not holding them accountable, not preventing those types of behaviors. So they are literally ripping both of these situations out of their original context, which is fine if you want to talk about it from a very natural perspective, from the perspective of nature, but that's not the space that they're having this conversation in. The context in which they're having this conversation is making moral decisions, and we as human agents, as thinking agents, we are in this situation. So to reference all of this from a very just reality or nature oriented sort of position or context is convoluting the conversation. It's creating an equivocation, and it's a poor analogy on top of that. So it'd be a false analogy fallacy as well. This is so fucking amazing that Frank has this audience trained like this. It's just crazy. That's going to be it for their video today. If you will, please go down below and let me know what you thought about Frank Turek's position on this whole moral argument and evolution. I think he's totally dead wrong, but I'd love to hear what you think about it. And while you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.